Hello everyone, in this video we will have yet another example of file I/O because it's always good to have examples. Here in this program we're going to be doing, first we're going to be writing to a file and then we're going to be reading from that same file. The idea is that we open a file, we let the user enter in 10 values, we write those inputs into a file, and then we close the file and then we open it again, but instead of writing to it, we're going to read from it. So for the packages that I'll be needing for using this program is the string package. And this is because I want to determine the name of my file path with the string, right? And then let's see. We'll just include that for now. We'll include vector just in case we want to use a vector. We may or may not use this, but let's see where this goes. But without a doubt, this is probably the most important package that we include into our program, which is the f string. Right, this will allow us to open files and to read files and to write to files. So let's begin by reading in a file. First, I want to define the file name of the string. Whoa, I did not want to do that. String. So we have a string called file name, and we're going to give it, I don't know, test data.txt, and I gotta make sure that it's a string. Right, so now we have a string called file name, and the data inside file name is testdata.txt. This will be the file that we'll be creating and opening. Next comes the creation of how we're going to write to the file. And because we're writing to the file, we got to use the standard OF stream, right, where OF stream stands for output file stream. And I'm going to call this out file. And when I talked about creating files for writing to, I first did this and I said out file.open, and I give the file name path as well as our mode, or how we're going to interact with that file, right, which was this. So the standard name is part of the standard namespace, part of the input output stream namespace, and it's going to be called out, meaning that we're going to be writing to the file. That should be here. Right, so this is what I did at first, but when we were reading from a file, I said that we could do this, or we could make it as part of the constructor. And this is true, and this is what I will be doing. So we can do both. We can just declare it, and I'll put it as a comment. I can say OF stream, out file, and then I can say out file, open file name, and our mode, right? So here, like I said, we're going to be writing to the file, so I use the out, right, standard input output stream out mode. Okay, so with this being said, let's go about creating some data. And how are we going to begin about that? Well, what can we assume? Well, the thing that we can assume is that we know that we want the user to enter numbers, and I'll create just a float because the precision of the numbers that we're going to be reading in isn't that important. So I'm just going to say temp input. So this is the temporary input. We're just going to be reading this in from our standard cin, right? So the variable here, I mean, we're just using it as a temporary variable. So here we're going to say we are going to tell the user to enter 10 values. And we'll end this statement with a new line. Now, Now we created our temporary input, which we'll be using to read in values from the user, and then we have just prompted our user for entering 10 values. So if I want the user to enter 10 values, well, I need to check two things. Here in the constructor, I'm assuming that we're opening the file, so I need to check that that assumption is correct. So I'm going to say if out file is open. Right, so if out file is open. So if it is open, well, here now I want to read 10 values. So I'm going to say int I for I equals 0, I less than 10, I plus plus. Right, so here I'm going to be looping 10 times, and I'm actually going to designate to the user that they're entering values. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to say cout, and well, let's leave that there, and I'll give them 2 angle brackets. So it's kind of like a prompt, right? So here I tell them that they're going to be entering 10 values, and here I give them a prompt where they'll be able to enter those values. So I'm going to print that out, and then I'm going to scan in for the temp input. Right, so here I am prompting the user to enter values in, and the user knows that they can enter values in because we have the double angle brackets here. So I'm going to read the value in, and right away, right after, I'm going to put the file, have the file get that input. So I'm going to write temp input to the file, and because I don't want everything in one line or everything merged together, I'm also going to be writing a new line. Right, so in this for loop, I let the user enter 10 values, and behind the scenes, I write the values that they enter to the file that I have open. And if this is the case, now that I'm done here, now that I'm done with writing to the file because the user's entered 10 values, I'm going to close the file. So I'm going to say out file close. That'll be it. But this is the case if we are able to open the file. And if it turns out that we can't open the file, what are we going to do? Well, in this case, I'm just going to let the user know, and I'm going to say file name, give them a space, could not be opened. And because my program is going to depend on this file name having values and being able to be written to, I'm just going to return 0 and end the program. Okay, so for here now, we have completed two things. We have written to a file, and the data generated by this file came from the user. So there's a bit of randomness, which is quite nice. But here we're going to keep this example simple, and I'm going to create a class that can read the file. So I use ifstream for input file stream, and I'm going to call this infile. And I'm going to take the reverse case. So here we put everything in one line. Here I'm going to put everything in 2 lines. Just to show that both of these methods, both of these classes can use the same methods. And they have the same methodology set up for both of them. So that way using them is quite easy. Or it's supposed to be easy. Right, so the idea, again, I can do this without any problem. I can say standard input file stream in file, and I can immediately do file name standard input output stream reading in the data. Right, both of these are totally legitimate, just like up here. Well, we're going to be in the same case with the output file. We need to check if the output file is open. So if in file is open. Right, if it is open, I'm going to use a while loop to read the data and print the data from the file. So I'm actually going to be reusing temp input. And so one thing that I'm going to try is I'm going to see the idea when I'm reading this file is that first I'm going to try to read in the value, and then I'm going to check if I'm at the end of the file, just in case it's an empty file. So I'm going to say in file temp input. I'm going to say while we are not at the end of file. While we are not at the end of file, what I'm going to do is I'm going to print out the temp value, the temp input that we have, and I'll do it with a space so that way everything's space separated. And then I'm going to read in a new value, right? And this is quite nice because using this type of methodology, I'm able to first test if we're at the end of the file or if the file is empty, meaning there's no contents, by trying to read it in. And if it's already at the end of the file, well, there's no point of printing or trying to do anything because we're at the end, or the file is empty and there's nothing written to it. But if we are not at the end of the file, we're going to print the value that we attempted to read in, and it means that that attempt was successful, and we'll keep reading in more data and printing it until we're at the end of the file. This is pretty nice, and it's a nice way of preventing things like printing the end of the file twice, which if I reverse the order and I didn't include this, that would happen. But this also prevents an action from happening, or from your code trying to output something that's not there, right? Because if I did something like this, if I flipped the order and I did something like this, right, if I do something like this, well, it could be already at the end of the file, and I could be reading in junk, and I could be printing in junk. And if it does have data, what actually happens is that I print the last data in the file twice. So we don't do this. This is a much nicer, easier on the eyes way of printing out data from a file. But there could be more, right? There are more ways to check about this. So after this, we're done. We're going to close, and that should be it. For the case that we're able to open the file. If for some reason there's a problem between writing to the file and writing into the file, I'm going to catch that here, and I'm just going to say just a simple print message to let the user know that the file name could not be read. And we'll leave it at that. Right, so this is the code that we'll be using and testing. And so first we're going to build to see that there's no errors. There's not. The build succeeded. 0 failed. We're good to run. So we'll run it. We're going to create our file. And I don't know. I'm going to put some of my favorite numbers. One of them's 8, 3, 7, 17. That's a nice number. Ooh, I like 12. Why don't we put some random stuff, maybe like 72, 49, I don't know, 104. That sounds pretty random. As well as 15 and 22. Right, so this is able to read all my values incorrectly, which is pretty nice. Not bad at all. And if I bring up the path where I have written my data, So here we have the test data document. It was just created, and if I open it, look at that. It's exactly the same as my input, right? And when we read it in from the file, it's exactly the same. And to wrap up this, files, they're just another source of data. You don't always have to keep regenerating data that you create either by yourself, by using tricks with for loops or vectors, or always using cin for getting data like this. You can always just create a file, have your data stored there, and read it there. It's also good for managing and reading in big data. You can have 2048 values, and it'd be easier to read it in from a file than to generate it by yourself or that kind of thing. Anyways, thanks for watching. See you in the next video.